The next panel, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, will be about technologies and business models for the future, or the hen or the egg eternal question. Does new technologies lead the way to new business models, or is it the other way around? We have a fantastic set of panelists, and they have an incredible width in their expertise. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your opinions on this. I have the lovely Purnima with me in the studio, but I will hand over to our moderator, the great Corrado. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and everyone. Good afternoon from Singapore. We have Matt in Manila, the Philippines, and Purnima in Copenhagen. So technology is definitely helping us to accommodate the fact that we can all be here virtually. I will be presenting and moderating this very interesting debate around an exciting question on whether technology is leading to the business model of the future, or is it vice versa. We will take the perspective from Asia and the perspective from Purnima, Matt, and Michael accordingly, and we will actually frame the discussion around, before letting the three of them introduce themselves, I think we will take the perspective of whether technology and business model are used for building the future in terms of playing to win or in terms of playing not to lose. So those two perspectives, I think we will keep along the next 30 minutes. Without any further ado, if I can ask Purnima to introduce yourself first, very shortly, and then Michael and Matt, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Purnima, and I'm the founder and chief consultant at TalentED Consultancy, a firm that looks to encourage and nurture inclusive and diverse workplaces and institutions. And I'm also a faculty member at the Copenhagen Business School. Very thrilled to be here and to provide my perspective on this particular issue.
Thank you. Michael?
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael. I lead Swift's payments and trade market business in Asia Pacific. And for those that don't know Swift, of course, we're a systemically important reference platform for the financial industry. And we've been in business for 45 years. We are not a maximizing profit oriented organization. And we're really focused on solving problems that exist at scale across the financial industry, such that if you solve it, you can have a larger impact with that as well. So I'm really looking forward to this panel.
Thank you. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Coling. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at UBX Philippines. We're the innovation garage and corporate VC of Union Bank Philippines. And my role as CIO is to seek out and transact in step change situations, transactions, opportunities relating to our goal for the future of banking and the invisible banking in the Philippines and Southeast Asia.
Thank you, Matt. So welcome, everyone. My name is Corrado. I'm a Sustainability Director at KPMG Singapore. And let's get started with the first question just to warm up the debate. And I will start asking Michael and then getting the view from Matt and Purnima on this following statement I have. Do you agree with the fact that tech is mainly US, regulation is mainly fueling Europe, and business models of the future are coming from Asia? Do you agree or do you not agree, and the why? Michael?
I don't think it's as simple as that, Corrado, right? But clearly there are some sort of cliches and labels at work when you talk about these different markets. I think to say that tech is led in the US when you have markets like China and India coming out with some incredible technology, I think is probably not true there. Business model innovation is definitely happening all over the world. Asia, certainly has a sharp pencil in that that regard. So perhaps you could argue that new business models, and particularly models that rely and hard lines and that kind of thing. So they're making the most of the mobile phone. Certainly a lot of that is happening in Asia, which is really promising as well. So, a little bit overly simplistic. Europe, of course, is full of regulation as well, but they're starting to really think about new business models. If you look at things like the European Payments Initiative and changing the landscape of retail payments in Europe, I think you could argue that most regions could play equally across all of those domains.
Thank you, Matt. What's your view?
I'm going to go with the side of yes, I agree. The simple reason is that we're in Asia. We're digitizing, automating, and going more mass market. We come from the fintech standpoint ourselves, but everything involves some sort of everything in business involves some sort of finance transaction or finance involvement. But the automation, digitization is happening without protecting monolithic legacy systems. And so when adoption does get here, and it's something that skilled organizations are working on, that should provide the agility for the adoption, and that the model that shows that agility is going to play well. It's going to age well in the other markets, given our user trends and user observations at the millennial and Gen Z cohorts, for example, where there's a slightly different attitude towards interacting and towards doing business. And so we're taking advantage of being able to go straight into that model now in Asia.
Thank you. Purnima, what's your view with the statement?
Yeah, so like Matt and Michael, I completely agree that it's not as straightforward as we'd like to think it is. And from the diversity and inclusion perspective, regardless of whether it's technology affecting business models or vice versa, we've really got to put the ideas of ensuring diversity and inclusion both in the talent pool within fintech, so that we're able to reach the diverse, customer base that we have, particularly in Asia. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. I just wanted to start off with telling you a little bit of data points or illustrating what diversity and inclusion actually looks like within the fintech industry. So globally, it's only about 12% of women that we see within the fintech sector. And of these, 75% of those women tend to work in HR and compliance and not really directly in engineering or operations or product development. And while there's not enough research and data tracking around female consumers, one company that has looked into this is actually CoinDance. And what they found that when it came to Bitcoin, investors, only 5.7% were actually female investors. And so that's something to really think about, both in terms of the talent pool within the fintech sector, but also in terms of the usage and the customer base as well. And another dimension of diversity there is, of course, culture. And we know Asia is so diverse and the customer base is so diverse. And so we've really got to ask ourselves how much representation in our talent pool within fintech are we seeing of that diverse customer base. Most of the models that are out there, as well as the technology platforms that are available, have been developed primarily for Europe or US market. And so we've got to think about how we include, these diverse perspectives, diverse needs from Latin America, from China, from India, as we talked about earlier as well. So we've got to start looking and putting diversity and inclusion absolutely at the forefront, regardless of which way we're looking at it.
Yeah, so diversity and inclusion sounds to me is the common theme across the world. So if we are going back to my initial statement with tech being in US and the regulation in Europe and the business model in Asia, we can agree that it's probably a simplified version of the reality, but what is in common is really the diversity and inclusion. So if I should zoom in into that and look at the future and sustainable growth of the future, do you think it will be driven by tech, or will it be driven mainly by new business models? So which one is impacting which first? And if I can also here start with Michael to get your sense from a Swift perspective. So is it product led, or is mainly customer led? Sorry.
Yeah, look, I mean, if I was just to make a distinction between technology and sort of business problem, and I'm very much on this has to be something that starts with business problem, and which to me, and I'm a traditional marketing and if I give you an example, if you take the context of cross-border payments, which is very topical these days, many of the actors in the industry and new companies sort of start with there's something wrong with the technology-led thesis, if you like. Networks are too slow, or there are all these things that happen to, affect the performance of payments. When you unpack that, though, and you look at payment networks, in general, the technology does what it should do, right? We've come to rely on technology, and it performs. So from a speed perspective, I can send a transaction from here in Singapore, where I'm living and working, to Copenhagen, and it will travel across, for example, the Swift network in 2 or 3 seconds. It's only constrained by the laws of physics. So the technology is fine. So, where does the problem reside in something like cross-border payments? And it's a business process problem, which means that you need to fit the way that acting with cross-border payments and to solve these business process frictions, right? These things that drag on the performance of payments. So, why for some institutions it's because they have to undertake, for example, compliance and fraud checks, and their processes are not up to date to do that. They have paper process in the mix in some markets. They need to supplement payment instructions with additional information that is not readily available. There are all these things that kind of drag on the performance of the payment. And, at Swift, we work with our community of banks to really kind of tackle those frictions. And it's independent of the technology, frankly. There are technology tools that help, right? So now we can track a payment around the world, and we have a universal tracking application, which is a piece of technology that gives a unique identifier to a payment, and you can see where it is. So that's a technology application. But the core is really actually stripping friction out of the system and making these cross-border payments, in the example that I'm using here, right, simpler and easier for customers to consume. So I'm big on fixing business, right, and having business models change as opposed to technology. New technology will come and it'll get folded in, but unless you have a laser focus on business problems, it's very hard to make change in an industry.
Yeah, and Matt, do you recognize that in your lab in the Philippines?
Absolutely. I can completely agree with what Michael's saying, but for the sake of discussion, I'm going to emphasize the need for technology. But I think that we would violently agree for all of the underlying principles for the need for both, what drives it. Myself, not being a developer, I'm not a technical founder. So for me, I'm not going to invest if the business model isn't sound. But I know that our deployment pain points, for example, are going to be about technology, specifically for brand new use cases. And the idea is you get to be user focused. You want to build it to be sustainable, meaning that you're going to make it worth your while and fulfill your mission. And that user focus requires you to reach the user and not try to force that user to change their behavior too much. And that's what drives the embedded invisible banking theme of it as well, and that the way that we price for that, we get a lot of flexibility when you're deploying at a low cost, the cost of service, the cost to acquire, and if the design is right, then the more risk, for example, that participants in a given chain, if it's a payment network, different kind of risk. Lending platform, people are specifically looking for risk, but either way, they're going to need technology to achieve the automation required in order to get that full impact of the adoption that was the point for entering the business in the first place.
Yeah. Thank you. Purnima, going back to diversity and inclusion, and I'm tweaking a little bit the question that I was asking Michael and Matt around the growth, whether it's coming from the tech or the business model, and asking you instead, if business model, if you go back to what I mentioned at the beginning, if business model are made because you play to win, and tech chosen if you play not to lose, how will diversity and inclusion actually be helping tech and business model to find each other?
Yeah, I think, Karate, look, in the Asian context, it's a really diverse space, right? We've got to recognize that the diversity across Asia is something that we really need to consider. And we're talking about tech and of course being a key enabler of the business models, but it's also ensuring that it's meeting the needs of the diverse consumer base. And Asia is unusual in that way because of the sheer diversity, both in terms of culture, but also in terms of the socioeconomic, you could say even political systems that exist within those markets, legislation as well. And so because of that diversity, we've got to keep so many of those parameters in mind as we think about these diverse product services that fintech is providing to consumers. I mean, if we look at Asia and we compare it to some of the business models that are out there that are being used in other parts of the world, we do notice some of those differences. I mean, if you look from a very cultural standpoint, Asia is characterized by, having cultures that are more, patriarchal in some way, or there's a power distance and top-down decision-making even in family units within the consumer base. And that, of course, adds to the gender divide in terms of the actual user of some of the products and services that fintech is providing. You add to that, the long-term orientation that affects, saving and spending characteristics across the region as well. And then in terms for fintech, companies, how communication happens in reaching out to the consumers as well. As they think about the business models and reaching out, we find that in Asia, you have societies that are much more high context and more relationship oriented. And so these factors, the cultural factors, play a really big part in defining, the kind of products and services out there. So there's the consumer angle that is really important, the diverse consumer base. And that means that the talent within fintech has to represent that and reflect that as well. I want to touch on a particular point that I think Matt brought up earlier, and that's the generational differences across Asia, right? And I think that's a really important one to consider. Of course, there's a growing middle class in Asia, and they say that by 2030, about 75% of China's population could actually be middle class, and India could be the largest middle class population around the world. And so if we keep that in mind and we try and look at Generation Z, for example, of course we know that they're shopping online globally, but they're also shopping online, in Asia as well. And 2/3, in fact, of Asia Pacific Gen Z, saves a large part of their allowance, and a majority of them think that it's really important to save. We've got to keep in mind some of these generational shifts that are happening. We've got to remember that Gen Z's parents, Generation X, possibly all of us actually on this panel, we come from a generation that experienced the dot-com, crash, and we're the generation that experienced the 2008 recession. And so our children of Generation Z have seen us go through that, which means that they have their own perspectives around saving and spending, and this is very much prevalent in the Asian context. So we've got a few factors, around culture and socioeconomic differences across Asia that we've got to keep in mind as we think about those business models.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Michael Swift has been taking those, the point that you were making around the business model and the diversity and the new generation trends. I think Swift has done something different as well. So can you share that, please?
Yeah, so diversity is incredibly important at Swift, right? And to give you two examples, one, I have a team of payment professionals operating across Asia, and I have them as young as in their 20s and some are in their 50s, and they have language and cultural diversities, so China and Japan and India, and by the way, the team is half male and half female, right? So I feel like I really get the benefits from that diversity, right? And it works well across the team also. In a larger picture, Swift opened a Kuala Lumpur office I think 7-8 years ago now, designed to help with some of our global servicing requirements at Swift, both providing services internally to our organization, but externally to customers as well. And we chose Kuala Lumpur after a thorough process of looking at many other places in the world. And we now have reached a point whereby our KL office size a number of people only to our Brussels headquarter office. Yeah, so quite a surprising result. That wasn't the initial plan. It's grown to about 500 people in Kuala Lumpur, and we're only about 3,500 people globally. And the thing we're really pleased about in that is, on average, the age profile is quite a bit less than our global average. We have incredible language diversity. We have a very skilled base of employees there, very, very highly educated. And so it actually represents a sort of a new microcosm for us in terms of, sort of diversity profiles in the organization as well. And, overall, it's a fantastic sort of contribution to our overall Swift, what is very much a global business for us as well. And we have that capability here based in Asia, but serving the globe.
Yeah. And Matt, since tech is such an important piece for the work that you're doing, can you share some of the user cases that you're working with where you're trying to blend the tech, the business model, and the diversity?
Absolutely. Having the diverse workforce also gives the perspective to be able to reach the user in the way that you really need to. The Philippines is a very devout country with 90% Catholic and 10% Muslim, and it's also just a very progressive in some other like lifestyle categories and classifications that, with the broad acceptance in the workforce, you have the availability to add talented people. If you're specifically focused on hiring a lot of talented people, you can have an advantage in the market at reaching more of these users who might have a differentiated need that maybe just nuanced that you wouldn't pick up in an economics textbook written in North America, for example. And so that's with 7,000 islands and nearly 100 dialects spoken, people need to be reached. People like to be recognized, and they don't necessarily need to be personally greeted and thanked for their engagement, but I know that people do appreciate when it feels accessible to them. And so when you've got these differences, the accessibility can be very easily embedded, adaptable, and that is it's very important for that sustainability. And also considering that a lot of these are based on a network effect, several of the business models, that word of mouth within communities, with 98% Facebook usage in the Philippines, for example, that people, news spreads, word spreads really, really fast. And people do enjoy sharing positive experiences, especially when they've been made to feel included.
Yeah. Matt, before summarizing, I will stay with you 1 minute. What are the, based on what you just mentioned, do you see any new banking product emerging from the Philippines that you think will impact the rest of the, I'm not saying the world, but let's say that can gain traction in other parts of the world?
A banking product, I would say more like a banking approach. We talk about invisible banking, but what are we really going after? And this is about using technology and having an innovative business model together. I'm not walking back my statement earlier about tech, but wanted to keep it lively. But yeah, this is about overcoming the hurdles that might previously that exist in other markets and have existed historically to be inclusive, to be complete, going after an open society, open banking, open borders. That is really the key for the next gen business model because people are going to seek that out, and this is an enabler of that, and it makes your life easier to exist under that that regime or lack thereof, and that's what's really exciting about the future.
Thank you, Michael. Your take? What do you see happening?
I think in Asia, right? Sort of, if you're in other parts of the world, watch out, because Asia is really kind of internationalizing, and they're building platforms that have ambition to scale across the globe. And you can see that in China already, but keep an eye on, for example, e-commerce in Southeast Asia. That is a really hot segment at the moment. You're seeing, new emerging kind of digital giants built around, ride-sharing context, right? So Uber-like companies in Southeast Asia. So I think you want to watch for that kind of trend, right? Asia kind of taking a larger place, based on its population and a relatively youthful population, a large population size, that diversity that we've been speaking about with, and Purnima really kind of put right. So, look for more of Asia asserting itself on the global stage, both in China, India, and Southeast Asia.
Thank you, guys.
Purnima.
Yeah. So just to sum up, I think we're almost running out of time. Yes. I see Sarah right here, so I'm just going to quickly, summarize my point of view. And of course, as Michael has rightfully said, that if Asia is that diverse as we know it to be, then we've got to see that talent within fintech. So we've got to hire diversely. We're going to make sure that our fintech companies are as inclusive as possible to this diverse talent, and we've really got to listen out for the diverse customer base as well. I think it was Michael who mentioned earlier about, we're hiring within fintech very highly educated talent that is diverse, as you can see with Swift. But it's also about making sure that the products and services also reach out to those who don't quite fall into those talent pools that we're hiring from, and making sure that we're listening to the customer base as well. So hire diversely across culture, gender, age, socioeconomic, privileges, and those different groups within the environment within Asia. I think that's really important to consider. And I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, who's right here.
Thank you so much, guys. And I think it's not just me that thinks this is super interesting, because we have one of the audience watching, Alessandra, mentioned that this is the most interesting, one of the most interesting discussions on the whole agenda. And then we have 170 speakers and more than 80 sessions. So super happy to have heard this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.